Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome all viewers. Inshallah, today we will be going over a verse in the Quran where Allah tells us, وَمَن لَمْ يَحْكُمْ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْكَافِرُونَ. And whoever does not judge by what Allah has revealed, then it is those who are the disbelievers. And the reason that we want to talk about this verse today is to clarify certain misconceptions and certain misinformation that's being spread on the internet. Some of these people are actually completely anonymous. Some of these people, they show their face, but nobody knows who they are. Some of these people, we do know who they are, and we know that they never studied their religion with the scholars upon the Sunnah, but rather they might have some sort of secular education, or perhaps they have no credentials. And when you listen to such people, when you get your deen from such people, you're going to be manipulated if they want to push a certain twisted agenda. And this is why the scholars of Islam tell us not to expose ourselves to doubts, to be careful who we sit with and who we listen to, and what we expose ourselves to. I have repeatedly said regarding the Islamophobes, for example, those who their entire careers are all about bashing and misrepresenting Islam, to not listen to them. Scholars have said that it's not even permissible, except for very specific people under very specific circumstances, to even go and watch their videos. And as obvious as it is that these career Islamophobes want to lead you astray, and you shouldn't really be exposing yourselves to their content, there are still people that can't help themselves. They still expose themselves to the content. And then they start becoming confused, not because the doubts that they're being exposed to have any validity, but it's because those people don't have enough knowledge to understand what they're being exposed to and how things are being falsely conveyed to them. And even if they did, what's the benefit? Stop playing around with your iman, with your deen. And unfortunately, this isn't exclusive to Islamophobes, but there are also deviant groups within the fold of Islam who lead people astray, who confuse people, who take the Quran and Sunnah and misrepresent it in order to push a false agenda. This is why, as much as we might not like refuting people, we might not like infighting within the Muslim community, it's something that is inevitable. It's part of our religion. And for starters, inshallah, I'm going to use a very clear example that I think many of us have experienced ourselves in terms of an ayah from the Quran being misrepresented and the devastating consequences that come as a result. So the first thing I'd like to do is travel back in time to September 11th, 2001. At this time, I was a teenager in high school. I wasn't a Muslim. I didn't know any Muslims. I didn't know anything about Islam. However, the death and destruction that occurred that day had everyone talking about Islam and Muslims. So when I got home, I simply did a Google search to learn about Islam. What's going on? Who are these Muslims? What is this religion? So I found a website and I started reading about Islam. Now, I don't know who was responsible for that website. I don't know who wrote it. But what I do remember vividly was that they quoted a verse from the Quran and it said, "Kill the disbelievers wherever you find them." And this website was saying, this is what Muslims believe. Their religious text tells them to kill the disbelievers wherever they find them. So myself, as well as many Americans, we're being fed this propaganda. We're watching the Twin Towers fall over and over again. Life as we know it completely changed after that day. And because this particular verse from the Quran was presented in such a way, many of us had two specific reactions. Number one, we completely wrote off Islam as even possibly being true. I didn't even consider looking into Islam again for another 7 years. And secondly, it made many Americans open to the idea of going to war with Muslims. Because based on how this verse was being portrayed to them, they already felt like Muslims were at war with them. And that is just the perspective of non-Muslims when this verse was being misrepresented to them. Look at the terrible misguided reaction based on falsehood. But the dangers of misrepresenting such verses don't only affect non-Muslims, but they can also affect ignorant Muslims. If there's a Muslim who already believes that the Quran is from Allah and somebody misrepresents this verse to them, then they can be misguided into thinking, oh, we're supposed to kill the disbelievers wherever we find them. So then you can even have Muslims going astray due to Islam being misrepresented to them. I'm bringing all this up so that we can truly internalize the death, destruction, and chaos that can ensue just based on people spreading a false understanding of Islam. Now one might say, well, how is this a false misunderstanding? The verse seems very clear. kill the disbelievers wherever you find them. Isn't it obvious? I can understand that. You can understand that. Don't try to twist and change things. Well, when somebody approaches the religion in this way, they have compounded ignorance. Not only do they not know something, but they think that they know. They don't even realize that they don't know. And these are some of the most dangerous people, because they are insistent on acting upon their ignorance and spreading it. Well, let's find out how a verse like this can be misrepresented. First of all, the Quran is not in English. So immediately, if you are being exposed to something in English, you're already putting trust in the translator. Therefore, you really need to be able to trust the person who's translating for you. You really need to make sure that that person has a proper understanding, that they know what they're talking about, because you are heavily dependent upon them. And next, we should always remember that the way to properly follow Islam is to base our understanding on the Quran, the authentic Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, with the understanding of his companions. So we don't just approach the Quran and say, oh, I understand this. This is what it means. This is what I'm going to act upon and spread throughout the internet. But rather, we approach the Quran itself holistically. How do certain verses of the Quran explain other verses of the Quran? Then we have the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ himself explaining the Quran. And who did he teach Islam to? His companions. So we refer to the way that they understood the religion because they had the best understanding of the religion. And what you'll find is that if you approach the Quran holistically, if you look at the teaching of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ with the understanding of the companions, nobody understood this verse to mean that you just kill the disbelievers wherever you find them. If you're a Muslim and you find a disbeliever, you kill them wherever you find them. None of them ever taught this. None of them understood this verse to mean that, ever. In fact, if you just look at the beginning of this verse, it says, then when the sacred months have passed, then kill the mushrikeen wherever you find them. So right off the bat, somebody has to ask themselves, when the sacred months have passed, what does that mean? What are the sacred months? What does this refer to? You instantly have to humble yourself and figure out what's actually being said. And what you'll find is that this verse is specifically referring to an event that happened in the past. The Quran was revealed over the span of 23 years. There are reasons that certain verses were revealed. At that time, the Muslims and polytheists were at war. And this verse is specifically talking about a situation where there was a treaty given to the polytheists for a number of months. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this is because, inshallah, Muslims already know this. We've already had to deal with this verse being misrepresented to us and weaponized against us. And I want you to keep that in mind when we look at another verse, so you can understand how similar things are done with other verses. So you have to have a strong foundation regarding how you approach your religion, so you don't fall for these tricks over and over and over again. So now we want to move on to the verse in question. Allah tells us in the Quran, and whoever does not judge by what Allah has revealed, then it is those who are the disbelievers. Now, just like people misrepresented the verse, kill the disbelievers wherever you find them, in order to push an agenda, and they caused so much chaos as a result of their ignorance being spread, people do the same thing with this verse. They say, this verse is clear. It's very obvious. I can understand that. If you don't rule by what Allah legislated, you're a kafir. You're a disbeliever. And then what do? They start making takfir. Now I want to give some examples to better illustrate how, just like kill the disbelievers wherever you find them can be misunderstood in order to spread chaos, the same thing can be done with this verse. Imagine there's a Muslim family, a husband, a wife, children, and let's say that the husband, he deals with riba, he deals with interest. And not only is he dealing with interest himself, but as the father, he has authority over his family. So he also allows his family to deal with interest. Now, clearly, we all know that dealing with interest, this is a major sin in Islam. So ask yourself, if somebody just takes this verse and they think, oh, it's so clear, whoever does not judge by what Allah has revealed, then it is those who are the disbelievers. Is this Muslim father now a disbeliever? Is he a disbeliever for dealing with interest himself? Is he a disbeliever for allowing those under his authority to deal with interest? Well, the correct understanding, based on the Quran, an authentic sunnah, and understanding of the companions, is that no, this in and of itself does not make somebody a disbeliever. It makes them sinful. This is indeed a major sin, and by not making takfir of this individual and calling him a disbeliever, it doesn't mean we're defending what he's doing. We're not an agent bootlicker saying that what he's doing is good for dealing with interest and allowing those under his authority to deal with interest, but rather we are sticking to the proper understanding of Islam. This is a major sin. And the first sect to deviate in Islam, in that they started making takfir of people for their sins, were the Khawarij. This is just a fact. This is what the Khawarij do. Now that we shared an example of a Muslim father who has authority over his family, well, what about a Muslim ruler who has authority over a country? If he deals with interest, is he now a disbeliever? If he allows the people in his country to deal with interest, is he now a disbeliever? Or is he sinful? Now let's be clear, Islam is balanced. It's possible that the father could actually be a disbeliever. It's possible that the ruler could potentially be a disbeliever. Allah, of course, knows the reality of that. However, for human beings to make takfir of specific individuals, there are certain conditions that have to be met. And those conditions are not met when somebody just sees a ruler doing something haram, doing a major sin. And when people fall into this, and they misrepresent certain verses, and they unjustly make takfir without fulfilling those conditions, they are associated with the Khawarij. They are associated with takfiris, because these are the mistakes that they're falling into. These are the deviant groups whose footsteps they're following. And by saying that we can't label such rulers or such people as disbelievers doesn't make somebody a bootlicker. I mean, what kind of academic language is that, calling people bootlickers? I mean, who are these people that speak this way? People should really fear Allah in calling people these names when they are simply defending the Sunnah. They're simply trying to follow the Quran and Sunnah with the understanding of the companions. They're labeled as agents and bootlickers. SubhanAllah. I really advise you to fear Allah. You're going to be held accountable for all the slander, all the stuff that your mouth so loosely just spews all over the place. We don't like seeing rulers sin. We don't like seeing the legislation of Allah not implemented. Of course, we want to have the most righteous rulers. We want to see the laws of Islam implemented. But we know the only way we can ever reach that point is to actually practice our deen properly. Following in the footsteps of the Khawarij only leads to worse conditions for the Muslims. Like, why don't you have some sympathy? Why don't you have some empathy for all the suffering that Muslims are going through? Because the masses were riled up and encouraged to overthrow their governments. Are they in a better condition now? Honestly, who is more worthy of being labeled an agent than people who lead to the death and destruction of Muslim societies? Versus those saying, yeah, maybe there are rulers who are sinning. Maybe we would like to see them follow Islam more closely. However, inciting rebellion and hatred and animosity towards them, we see where that leads. So why don't you have empathy for your Muslim brothers and sisters? Now, I don't want this video to go on too long. Let's get back to the verse. Now, there are actually 3 verses in this chapter which use similar language. We find, and whoever does not judge by what Allah has revealed, then it is those who are the kafirun, the disbelievers. The next verse we find, and whoever does not judge by what Allah has revealed, then it is those who are the zalimun, the wrongdoers, i.e. the unjust. And then we find, and whoever does not judge by what Allah has revealed, then it is those who are the fasiqun, the defiantly disobedient. So if we just continue reading this chapter, we find that sometimes those who don't judge by what Allah has revealed, sometimes they are referred to as disbelievers. Sometimes they're referred to as being unjust. Sometimes they're referred to as being disobedient. So immediately, with just a little bit more of a holistic understanding of the Quran, you start to get a better understanding. If we just look at what Tafsir Ibn Kathir has mentioned about this verse, he says that Ibn Abbas commented on this verse saying, whoever rejects what Allah has revealed will have committed kufr, will have committed disbelief. And whoever accepts what Allah has revealed but did not rule by it is a zalim, is unjust, and a fasiq, rebellious, and a sinner. He also mentions regarding this statement, it is an act of kufr, it is an act of disbelief. Ibn Tawus added, it is not like those who disbelieve in Allah, His angels, His books, and His messengers. And Athawri narrated that Ibn Jurayj said, that Ata said, kufr duna kufr, wa dhulm duna dhulm, wa fisq duna fisq. Disbelief less than disbelief. Oppression less than oppression. Disobedience less than disobedience. And it was also mentioned that Tawus said, regarding this verse, this is not the kufr that takes one outside the fold of Islam. This is not the kufr that annuls one's religion. So please just understand, if there's one thing you can take away from this video, remember you need to be careful who you get your religion from. Many of these people on the internet, they're quoting this verse and saying, it's very clear. Just see what it says. It says, whoever does not judge by what Allah has revealed, those are the kafirun, those are the disbelievers. But what happens when you actually reference the people of knowledge? It's not so apparent. Just like kill the disbelievers wherever you find them is not so apparent. And I want to close by mentioning what Sheikh Uthaymin, rahimahullah, said in his tafsir of this verse. He said that this issue is a very dangerous issue because some individuals are swift to pass the judgment of disbelief on a ruler without the conditions for that being met, and that can lead to great evil, rebellion against the ruler, misguiding the general populace of Muslims, chaos in society, and unlawful blood being spilled. Go back and ask the people that preceded us what happened with the Khawarij that declared Muawiyah to be a disbeliever, and after that declared Ali to be a disbeliever. May Allah be pleased with them both. These were people, the Khawarij, that would stand at night in prayer and read the Quran. The people that the Prophet ﷺ spoke about when he said, a person from among you will despise his own prayer when compared to the prayer of one of the Khawarij, and he will despise his own recitation when compared to the recitation of one of the Khawarij. Even with all the worship they did, they were the cause of so much evil and chaos that only Allah knows the extent of. Anybody that reads about the Khawarij and the last of this nation is like the beginning, meaning we will get the same results from our actions. Anybody that reads about the Khawarij will know that rebelling against the ruler is a major cause for corruption. However, the ruler's continuous judging by other than that which Allah sent down is a great harm, without doubt. Therefore, it becomes imperative upon the people of knowledge, to select the lesser of the two evils, because if blood begins to be spilt, it is very difficult to halt the fighting. It is probable that the ruler can be fixed through soft speech and through sitting with him and advising him. Allah knows best. That does it for this video. I just want to mention, you see how Sheikh Uthaymin, rahimahullah, he mentioned the Khawarij. Why did he mention the Khawarij? Why do we keep bringing up this group? It's because they have specific rhetoric that they use, that they misrepresent. And when you have knowledge of the Quran and Sunnah with the understanding of the companions, and you also have knowledge how certain sects have deviated, like the Khawarij, like Hizb ut-Tahrir, then you can see it. And that's when it really becomes a cause for concern. Why do these individuals online keep spewing the rhetoric of Hizb ut-Tahrir and the Khawarij? And that's why in these videos, we don't want to just make it refuting specific points here and there. We want you to establish a solid foundation. We want you to understand your deen so that you can identify these things yourself. But you're never going to have a solid foundation if you just get knowledge from the wrong people, if you just expose yourself to all sorts of doubt and confusion. May Allah make it easy for all of us. I know it's very difficult because you go on the internet, anyone can make a video. People are putting out all sorts of confusion, but hopefully this at least provided some context and clarity. JazakumAllahukhairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.